While some of it might seem to be stuff we've heard before, the results might startle you to some extent, and maybe we could even apply it here at home. So, without further ado, check out Cue This.
The economy of Israel as it exists today really got started in the mid-1980s. During this time, the country was struggling with an annual inflation rate of over 350%, which meant that the Israeli shekel was basically useless for economic applications. Realistically, inflation beyond about 5% does more harm than good, so Israel's 370% rate of inflation in 1984 was a real problem that most of its citizens avoided by just not using their own currency. Stability and confidence is one of the most important things in economics, and nobody within or outside of Israel had any confidence in the currency's stability, and by extension the economy as a whole. Changing this was the first and most difficult step the government had to take to start turning the country around. In 1985, Israel introduced a new currency to replace the shekel that had effectively become worthless, with the unimaginatively named New Israeli Shekel. Just introducing a new currency doesn't fix the problem of sustained inflation by itself. The government had to get people to actually use it instead of doing business in the much more widely recognised and stable US dollar. To get people to use their new currency, they had to give them confidence that it wouldn't have the same problems as the old currency. The new shekel was supposed to be a new start, and it was rolled out in parallel with the Israeli government's economic stabilisation plan. To turn its economy around, Israel rolled out a 5-point plan that was simple in theory. The government first cut its excessive expenditure. Government spending is a major inflationary pressure. If the government is putting money into the economy through welfare payments, government jobs, or big infrastructure projects, that is going to increase consumer demand because more people will have more money. By cutting this spending, people that used to receive income from these sources won't anymore, and the businesses that used to receive income from them will also find it harder to make money. They also made the Bank of Israel, the central bank in the country, completely independent of the government, like it is in most advanced economies around the world. Central banks and governments normally have aligned roles of general economic prosperity, but letting the banks act independently means that they can step in and raise interest rates and stop money creation, even if the country's leader is trying to get them to do the opposite. After cutting expenses and giving independence to the central bank, Israel's government also let the shekel fall in value in international exchange markets, and then temporarily fixed the rate at the new low price. A devaluation in domestic currency was an interesting move because it actually heightens inflation. If a country is dependent on imports, which Israel definitely is, having to spend more local currency for the same amount of stuff is the definition of inflation. But the government's first challenge at this time was not to control inflation, it was to get people to use their currency. If people could trade in the US dollars they were using for a reasonable amount of new currency, they would be more likely to adopt it, which was a worthwhile trade-off even if it did come at the expense of heightened inflation for the first 5 years. By the end of the 1980s, inflation had returned to a reasonable level, and most of the trade within the country was once again being done in their own currency. The stabilisation plan had worked, and even today a lot of countries could take the same steps to pull their way out of similar problems. But for Israel, this now meant that it could fully realise its potential. The amount of innovation that takes place in Israel has earned the region around Tel Aviv the nickname Silicon Wadi, which is the Arabic term for valley, and a reference to its innovation which is on par with Silicon Valley, the tech innovation capital of the world. Unfortunately for other countries looking to replicate Israel's success, it's not as easy as just becoming a global centre for innovation and technology. Israel was only able to grow these industries through a program that it rolled out once its economy was back on track that encouraged innovation by having the government directly invest in promising industries. This was not a new idea by itself. The reason Taiwan is the global centre of chip manufacturing is because their government directly invested and supported companies like TSMC. But Israel arguably did the same thing better. Government investment into for-profit institutions is always difficult because there is so much room for corruption to just end up with government funds being given to people that pay the right bribes. The solution they ended up with was a hybrid approach where private investors were encouraged to fund businesses in Israel with their own money, and in return they would get generous tax concessions and zero interest rate loans from the government to make their money go further. This meant that investors were still risking their own money so they wouldn't use it irresponsibly, but it also made Israel a very attractive place to invest and start a business. The best part was that since these loans got paid back, the Israeli government effectively built out its advanced industries for no cost to them whatsoever. The State of Israel did not have a lot of advantages, and it has overcome a lot of challenges in its short 75-year history as a country. The fact that despite these challenges, it has been able to become one of the most prosperous economies in the world is a fantastic sign that even countries facing severe challenges today have a hope of making a better future for their people with some good economic management.
That video courtesy Economics Explained, where we will be posting up the links where you could see their whole breakdown. But it's interesting. I think the first question we need to ask ourselves is, how severe do we think our economic situation is? And I believe that's a matter of perspective. And then now when we look at the proposed solutions that Israel undertook, they don't seem things that are foreign to us. Cut government spending, ensure your central bank is independent, potentially devalue your currency based on how your imports are going, because Israel was very much dependent on imports as well. And then government incentives, tax breaks, in order to attract investment. But I feel as though while we might do that for oil and gas, that last part, we don't necessarily do it or do it enough for other sectors that when we say diversification like agriculture, well, where is incentives for agriculture or zero interest loans or low interest loans?
They actually exist. They actually exist. The subsidies, the grants, and even the loan facilities available to farmers in Trinidad and Tobago, they exist. Do you know what they are?
Well,
that's my point.
But
they exist. The issue that we have here in Trinidad and Tobago is even if the financial support is available, the policy is not there. The other issue that we have is that the infrastructure and the facilities are not there. So even if we are able to have agricultural land here in Trinidad and Tobago, which, by the way, let's be honest with you, like if you take a look at Chagonas, for example, that entire strip where there are all these plazas being built, that's agricultural land. You're not really supposed to have all those plazas there. Those are supposed to be land that is used for agricultural purposes. And that is part of the problem. We're not actually focusing on agriculture in terms of the development of the industry, in terms of the policy, and in terms of the processing. Our thinking is, if we just make all these grants, all these subsidies, all these loan facilities available, and they do exist, that is going to solve the problem. Where are we with respect to that?
Well, first of all, I don't know if for things outside of the energy sector, that the scale is enough to really say we're going to build out an industry. The other thing is that they didn't necessarily just invest in tech, but they also invested to some extent in innovation. Both the education system was working within the end of the 1990. So the beginning of the 1990s, they had a large amount of immigrants from the former Soviet Union, so it assisted with their skilled pool of labor. Now, we were potentially looking at making TNT having a very highly skilled labor force, but I think we kind of missed the mark on the execution. We still potentially have that facility there. With regards to agriculture, where are the grants and the investment opportunities, not to just have a guy with a farm, but to bring in serious equipment to try to farm at a serious scale, potentially to push innovation with new techniques and technologies as to how to even just develop a farm.
But that's the whole point I'm making.
Right, exactly. And that's where I agree with you. That's the thing, like, I know we have the grants, but you don't actually see anything come from it. You don't even see like big scale business for the most part. Yeah, we have some players, but it's like almost the same players that we've always had.
The ideas exist. The lack of political will for implementation also exists. Understand it in context as well, right? Because we can go into the economics and even the economic theory with the case study of Israel. If I were to look at Trinidad and Tobago and look at history and look at how we are right now, we're not going to support farmers anytime soon. The government will come out and tell you we're supporting farmers. We're making these grants, subsidies, everything available, right? That is their mindset of what support is. Mm-hmm. It goes way beyond that. Why aren't we going to prop up the food industry? Because at the end of the day, and I keep pointing back to this, and people might think it's absolutely stupid, but try and correct me or tell me otherwise. The major players who are importing food or food products into Trinidad and Tobago, who are they?
But the interesting thing is, depending, And maybe the economics just does not work out. The numbers just don't work, the maths don't math, so it's too difficult. But one would think that the opportunity, there's a reason why Shell and BP are involved in the Brethren Gardens Solar Park. They were into oil. We used to call them oil companies. And, in the modern times, oil companies like, no, we're energy companies. And the hidden secret is that while they don't necessarily want to just dump fossil fuels 100% immediately, they're investing into green technologies. So if you're a food importer, and we do have issues with foreign exchange, right? We do have issues with our import bill. I would think, even with regards to just securing my own interests, maybe, how much have I looked into local food production? Because I could say this for the tourism sector. Just based off of how things are in other parts of the region and just how things are in Tobago, what would really help the tourism sector is, look, we're not really earning a lot of money right now. Give them tax breaks.
We've looked into investing in the food sector, but one major player has invested in a berry farm. Why in the world here in Trinidad and Tobago you want to invest in a bloody berry farm? Right? Why? I
haven't heard that. We could even grow berries here.
Look it up. We're building a facility. If I'm not mistaken, is it in Tobago?
Aren't berries temperate fruits?
My thing is, if we can invest in technologies in order to house a berry farm, why can't we look at other basic products?
That sounds so inefficient and expensive.
That could help. We have local lettuce, but we still import lettuce because of the various types of lettuce. Mm-hmm. Why can't we look at developing our own lettuce market? Go beyond just that. Avocado. We are constantly importing avocado from St. Vincent. We are importing ground provisions as well from St. Vincent. We keep importing sugar from Ghana, and people have made the argument, well, it's cheaper to import sugar from Ghana rather than produce it locally because Ghana has the market. And Ghana has an excess amount of sugar. But in those instances, I can make an argument and say, okay, I understand that. But I was told recently that there are still small sugar processing plants in San Fernando, if I'm not mistaken. The issue is, so you have the will and you have the money, you looking to invest in berries. Mm-hmm. Why not look at these other products that we are continuously having to bring in?
We do have local meat producers, and foreign meats seem to be cheaper. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, but what is it? What else could we do? Or conversely, what could you ask the government? Because again, when Sandals gets a tax break, sometimes for hotel chains, that is the profit margin there, the tax break. And perhaps it's something that we should look into. Hotel taxes less than VAT, but still, at least in the recovery period. With regards to food and agriculture, it could be the same thing. I get it, taxes government revenue, but to what extent is the government really depending on the revenue of industries that are, for all intents and purposes, in its infancy? They're not large, or at least not large enough to meet, with regards to food production, just the needs of our own country.